The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
One of the things that can happen to you in life, it's a dread disease in some ways, is lifestyle creep. You think that you've got a bit more money than you did, and you do have a bit more money than you did, but actually you don't have any more wealth. You find that it seems to have disappeared somewhere. So, in other words, you're not more financially secure. Warren Ingram is a certified financial planner and co-founder at Galileo Capital. Warren, good evening. I mean, this is quite interesting. So you might get a bit more money in your bank account every month, but you're not really feeling any richer. It's quite a common disease.
It is, and I love your phrasing. It's a dread disease. It's one we should all avoid and do our checks and make sure we keep ourselves healthy. So what happens, Stephen, is you get this increase, and potentially weren't really planning on it, and it's exciting. And so in that first month, you get that sort of injection of happiness, and you think, well, it's not a big, it's not like I've suddenly got a massive bonus. It's just an increase in my salary, and so you think about whatever it is, the subscription, the streaming subscription that you were kind of debating last month, but didn't want to spend the money on. There was that car that you were thinking about that just wasn't affordable, and suddenly it is. So it's those kinds of things where you kind of gradually ease your way into spending a bit more money, and so it's not just a big event. It's a kind of and I think the name is fantastic. It's a lifestyle creep. It just creeps up on you.
So, I mean, one of the things about this is that when you get an increase, it's perfectly rational to think, and I think human to think, well, look, I've been working really hard for this. I've been working extra hours. And often if you get an increase in monthly income, it's because actually you've been working more hours than anything else. And therefore I deserve this, or I've actually worked for this. Or it's just a little thing. Why would it have such a big impact? And yet that's the creep in this, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think, the psychology is right, that we feel we're entitled, and it is our money, and we've worked hard for it. So what's the problem? And I get the psychology, and certainly this is the money show, not the Grinch show. We're not going to steal all the joy out of life, and so I think just to say you should feel that you should feel some reward from this, and you should certainly benefit, but at the same time, you should just be very aware that what you're doing, if you allow this money to kind of just drift away over time, is you're not building wealth. You're just creating kind of future problems instead of future solutions. You're enjoying something now and relaxing a bit more now and getting a little bit of a kick now, but you're not solving the problem of financial freedom, retirement, building up a wealth pot. You're just spending more, and that's the thing we've got to be very careful of. Okay,
so the other thing is that some of them, it's not a once-off. It's not like you're buying yourself an ice cream. You're buying yourself a kind of recurring ice cream, right? These little upgrades, these little things are actually permanent quite quickly, and often permanent from the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's the thing we just don't conceptualize. So let's use the example. You get a 50,000 Rand bonus, and you reward yourself by blowing it all on tons of ice cream and a nice holiday. Next month, you're earning your normal salary, and the bonus is spent, and so your lifestyle costs in the next month haven't changed. So the money was a once-off thing. You spent it, it's gone. But contrast that with buying a bigger car, a more expensive car. What happens now is you're going to pay more on insurance. At some point, you're going to have to buy replacement tires. That's more expensive. At some point, you're going to have to pay for maintenance. And all of those costs are going to be higher on a bigger, more expensive car than the car you had. And so that's not a once-off cost. It's now a repeated cost. And unfortunately, it's a cost you lock in for life, because once you buy the bigger car and you reward yourself, it's very difficult. I would argue for a lot of people, they don't go backwards. You don't go from the tiny little two-door to the big 4-door and then back to the 2-door again. You kind of stay in the big one. So what you've done is locked in a more expensive lifestyle forever.
Okay, so that's really the difficulty here. All right, how do you survive lifestyle creep? We're speaking to Warren Ingram, as you know, the co-founder at Galileo Capital. Your questions from an 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567 in personal finance tonight. Your voice notes too on 072 702 1702. Why does it feel, there's a funny human thing about this, Warren, that it kind of feels normal. So, I mean, you know, the moment you get into a new car, it's very exciting. What happens after that?
There's actually a name given to this phenomenon. So the psychologists call it hedonic adaptation. And so what happens is...
hedonic adaptation, there's a phrase I'd never heard.
And we've got to talk about nominative determinism after this, but let's talk about hedonic adaptation. So hedonic adaptation, we get we buy the big car, or maybe you go and buy the phenomenally expensive house that's on the Atlantic seaboard, and you look at the sea all day. What will happen is the first day that you wake up and the new view, it looks amazing. By the third day, it's still exciting, but it's not as amazing as it was on the first day. By the third month, it's just your view. It's the thing you see when you wake up. And by the third year, it's just your life. And so our brains very quickly adapt to the circumstances that we're in. So if we're in the bigger house, we're driving the bigger car, we don't get the same kick that we did on the very first day. In fact, we get no more kick. We go back to the baseline that we had, when we lived in the smaller house or drove the smaller car. And so that's the ability of our brain to adapt to circumstances. It does actually happen in reverse as well. We can adapt to kind of very bad circumstances, and those become normal. But with lifestyle creep, what happens is our brain just gets used to it, and there's no more cortisol kick. There's no more fun and enjoyment. It's just life. It's just another day. And so, and that happens really, really quickly. And so that's sort of, the kick that you get from buying things bigger, better, faster. If that's how you kind of stimulate your happiness, unfortunately, you're on an endless race on a treadmill that will just never take you anywhere, because now we know that that's just going to become normal again. So if you weren't happy before, you feel happy for a little while, but then you go back to being unhappy again. And that's how our brain is wired.
Okay, there's another thing that happens, which is when you earn a little bit more, you tend to mix with people who earn similar to you, and now you need to kind of keep up a little bit, and you spend like they spend. What happens there?
The best examples I can think of are the people that are either trainee accountants or trainee lawyers. And they are called articled clerks, and they go from being articled clerks to now the qualified accountant, qualified lawyer, qualified doctor, whatever it is. And so now they move into the realm of the qualified and the professional. And then they look at all the people around them, and they're all driving better cars than the newly qualified person is. They seem to wear fancier clothes. And so you think to yourself, well, hang on, I better measure up here. I better stack up to these people. And so you do. And so now all of a sudden you're adapting to the new circumstance. You've had the jump in income. You've gone from being a regional manager to a general manager, whatever the thing is. Now you live like that, and you now benchmark yourself against those people, and suddenly you're now in a new normal. And what we don't really realize is, we think, everyone around us that's in a similar sort of position, driving the big car and the fancy house, we think that they're doing that, with cash, not with debt. And what we don't realize is, but behind that facade of success is usually someone in an equally compromised position and who's kind of scrambling just to kind of stay still or maybe keep their head above water.
Excuse me. Isn't this the secret to life, is that all you know is what you see of a person and what they choose to show you. You have absolutely no idea about the true state of their financial affairs, and you will never really know. The only person whose financial affairs you might know are the person you live with, your spouse.
Yeah, and if you've got a good relationship with with your parents. Potentially they'll have done a good job showing you what, how life really works. But I think that's the thing. We get into this, this comparison situation where we want to see ourselves stack up against our peers, and unfortunately, something like social media just gives you, takes this whole urge and puts it on steroids, because now all of a sudden we also just see, people living their best lives on social media, and we feel inadequate by comparison. But what we don't see is the other side, the things that they're struggling with, and inevitably they've got financial issues. We know this because somewhere around, I'm exaggerating maybe slightly, but it's probably 5 to 15 out of every 100 salary earning South Africans get to retirement safely. The rest of South Africa gets to retirement having earned a salary their whole lives without enough money to retire comfortably. So we just need to know that this comparison thing, it's absolutely lethal. And comparing yourself to the person next door is probably the worst thing you can do if it's causing you to spend more to try and match what they're doing.
It's also the secret to life. And man, if someone could teach it to me, I'd be very grateful. To not care what other people think of you, to not feel the need to keep up with, in England they would call it keeping up with the Joneses. There are lots of different ways of putting it, but to not feel that. If you can just be happy with what you have and concentrating on your own personal goal, well, then you're going to be quite happy.
I think that's really the key to kind of finding the secret to good money management as well, is once you kind of stop looking around and you start saying, what is it that I really want to do? What is it the life that I want to live? And going forward, where would I like to live one day? And how would I like to live my life? And I guess understanding that it must be realistic. Don't kind of come up with crazy dreams that make you unhappy forever. But we only get really dissatisfied when life doesn't work out against the thing we expect, against our own expectations. So the key here is to say, I'd like to be able to get to the point where I don't owe anybody any money. I get to and that's a very good goal to work towards. You can do that by limiting the debt you take on. Once you've hit that goal, you're probably better than 8 out of 10 salary earning South Africans already. So if you do want to do a comparison, that's a fantastic one. Then you start to say, well, now I'd like to build up some assets so that one day my money looks after me. That's a brilliant goal to have, and by all means do it, and you can do it relatively cheaply. And what you're not doing is saying, I need this branded clothing, or I need this kind of a car, because those are the things that take you down the road you don't want to go.
Okay, so how can you enjoy life free of the dread disease lifestyle creep?
I think the first thing is, the next time you get an increase, before you do anything, if you get a letter or however it works in your business where you're going to get a raise, the very first thing you do is set up a new debit order, so that if you get paid on the 25th, on the 27th of the month, you run a debit order off your account and it goes into an investment in your name. So you're now starting to pay your future self. And let's just make it a round number. You're going to get 10,000 Rand a month more in your bank account after your increase. I'm not saying that you take all of that 10,000 and put it into your savings and investments. That would be amazing if you did, but you do want to reward yourself and you do want some joy. So take 5,000 out of that increase and commit that to a debit order, so that when the money's sitting in your bank account and you've just got paid, the very first thing that happens is your debit orders go off. You've now paid your future self. You're taking care of business. And then the other money that's sitting in your bank account, you can now spend relatively guilt-free. And so you do get the benefit of the hard work that you're putting in, and you do get to enjoy life a little bit more than you were in the past, and raise that standard of living if that's what you want to do. But what you know is that you're also looking after yourself into the future. So you are starting to build wealth and not actually making yourself poorer. Because I mean, the really sad thing here is that you take that increase to justify taking on more debt. So actually, 3 months later, you're actually poorer than you were at the beginning, because you bought an asset, but you've actually got even more debt. And so net asset wise, you're backwards. That's a tragedy.
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, one way of doing it, I suppose, is to split the raise between the future you and the current you. They're both for you, but one's a little later and one's now.
and give yourself a reward. Just saying to yourself, okay, I do deserve something nice, and I've been kind of wanting to go on that holiday for a very long time. So now that the half of the increase that you're now going to spend, you can set that aside on a holiday if that's what's meaningful to you. That's a great thing to spend money on. But what you also know is that you've set aside money that's going to start building and compounding in your favor. And I think that's the way that people can enjoy life along the way, but also knowing that they are taking care of their future selves.
All right. Your questions for Warren, 011 883 0702 021 446 0567, and voice notes on 072 702 1702. One's come through from Pravesh saying, "Hi, I'm 29 years old. I finally got to the point where I can save some money every month. I'm confused about the difference between buying ETFs or unit trusts. Is one cheaper or safer than the other? What's the actual difference between an ETF and a unit trust, and how should a beginner choose between them?" It's a great question, Pravesh. We'll have an answer for you with Warren in just a moment.
The Money Show. Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Well, your questions for Warren Ingram. Lifestyle creep, of course, is what we're trying to avoid tonight. Pravesh's question: I'm 29. I can save some money. I'm confused about the difference between buying ETFs or unit trusts. Is one cheaper or safer than the other? And what's the difference between an ETF and a unit trust? And how should a beginner choose between them? It's a wonderful question from Pravesh, Warren.
I love it, and I think there used to be a huge difference between these, in kind of 10 or 15 years ago, but over time, well, maybe just to start, the history is that exchange traded funds were launched because unit trusts were simply too unwieldy, too expensive, too difficult to actually access and invest with a small amount of money. And so exchange traded funds were launched, and the way one buys an exchange traded fund, a stockbroking account. So most of the banks have a platform where you can, on your app, you can buy a share or an exchange traded fund, and you can do that with once-off money. So you can do that with a relatively small lump sum, and you don't need to commit to a monthly debit order. So what we found years ago was that kind of young people starting out would really respond to exchange traded funds before they would buy unit trusts, because unit trusts were expensive and clunky. And so what happened is the unit trust industry didn't stand still. They looked at this and said, well, hang on, we're going to lose out here. And so their fees have come down quite significantly. So I would say that it wouldn't be right to say that one's cheaper or safer anymore. I think that they're just a little bit different. And my biggest guidance to Pravesh would be, if you've got a monthly amount and you just want to do kind of a fire and forget solution, where you're saying, I want to set aside a debit order, I'm going to pay like 3,000 Rand a month, and I just wanted to know it's going to go into a good long-term investment, then I think a unit trust is probably the right way to go, because it certainly works better with monthly amounts on a fixed amount every single month. And I like that idea because it's fire and forget, and you're not tempted to spend the money. But if you've got a bit of extra money and it's irregular, maybe you don't get a fixed salary every month, then committing to a debit order might be a little scary. And in that instance, an exchange traded fund is probably a better idea, because you can put 5,000 Rand this month, the next month you do nothing, the following month you put in $1,000, and so you can always put in ad hoc amounts when it suits you. So you don't get the discipline of a debit order going off your account automatically. But if you don't have the stable income, then maybe look at an exchange traded fund. Or if you get paid once a year, you get some kind of a big bonus, and you don't have money through the rest of the year, then maybe an exchange traded fund is the right way to go. But I think they're both actually legally as safe as each other. So it's going to be which one you choose. And I guess if you've listened to the show, you're going to know. I'm going to tell you to buy a South African index and a global index, and make sure that you spread your risks. And that's probably the best way to get the safety aspect. But that would be the way I would choose, is basically how you get paid and how you can invest. Sure.
Thank you for that. Yeah, very interesting answer. Okay. Lifestyle creep. Some upgrades worth making? You basically been quite clear that we need to be very careful, but are some upgrades worth making anyway?
Yeah. So one thing that we've learned over time is that people don't get a rush out of buying things, buying stuff. We get a kick for a week or a month or something, but after that we go back to kind of normality. But one of the things that does make a big lasting impact on our lives is buying experience, paying for an experience. And for some people that might be kind of a hike up a mountain, and for someone else it might be a holiday with friends, where you go and do the migration or something. And what we buy with that is the experience of the trip and the holiday, but we also buy a lifetime of memories that we can kind of go back to time and time again. So spending money on an experience that, it's something that's meaningful to you is something that tends to be money well spent. It's something that adds to life. It usually, especially if it's something like travel, we tend to learn a bit more. We tend to grow as human beings through that process. And what you know about that is that it's not a cost that keeps recurring afterwards. It's not like a car where you've now got to maintain it. It's a holiday, you've bought it, you've paid for it, and it's done. But it keeps giving you that bit of joy and a shared experience with the people that you went on. So I think that those are things that you should buy and pay for yourself. But try to avoid the things that are going to cost you money every single month, every single year, and maybe that those costs increase, because that's the very definition of lifestyle creep. That's where you trap yourself into a very big expense that will just keep taking money from you month after month, year after year, and robbing your future self.
So I suppose the feeling is it's all about, so often with what you pose to us, how are we going to feel about it, not today, but in a year's time or even after that? And that's really the question.
Yeah. And if you're sitting there and you've got the increase and you want to go and buy something, then maybe do one thing, which is kind of give yourself a week and say, well, okay, if I still really want to buy this thing in a week's time, how will I feel? And, if you're as excited in a week's time, then maybe consider it more carefully. But if after a week you might look at it and go, actually, I don't really need that new phone or that new TV. The one I've got is perfectly fine. And it's actually, I'd much rather put the money towards a nice trip one day. And so you can give yourself a bit of breathing room before you make the decision. But, if it's something that's going to give you joy for a long period of time, it's something that's usable and reusable, and maybe something you can share with family, then maybe it is the right thing to buy.
Sure. Yeah, so interesting to look at. Warren Ingram, thank you. I really appreciate that. The co-founder at Galileo Capital, as always, so many important answers to really important questions, fundamental questions about life, I think. So Warren, as always, thank you so much. Really do appreciate it.